She always says that. Now, you know that in the New Testament, the story that was related, I believe, in the writings of John about a woman brought to Yeshua having been caught in the middle of adultery and thrown at his feet. The man was not there, and yet it was broad daylight for everybody. Well, that passage was added to the letter several hundred years after it was written. Is everybody aware of that?
Yep.
We got over that part before, and it's just to remind you, it's a literal impossibility because based on Torah teaching, if they'd have caught her in the middle of adultery, the guy would have had to have been there too.
Yep.
What's so funny?
I ran across the same scripture verse earlier this morning when I was reading the Torah portion.
Oh, funny how that works, huh?
Yeah, I crossed over John 8 and it started the whole sentence, the first 3 or 4 words, and I'm like, well, that would never have happened because if she actually was caught in the middle of adultery, she wouldn't have been able to be brought to the temple on Mount of Olives because
she wasn't brought to the temple, she was brought to Yeshua.
Yeah, I know. But it says in the scripture, it says that she was brought into the temple to Yeshua. She wouldn't be able, because she wasn't Tahor, she was Tameh.
Well, secondly, she was brought to Yeshua, but they really weren't fully accepting her, even though they couldn't deny him.
Right.
They didn't take her to the Kohanim. Her husband was not present. If she was caught in adultery, she either had to be in somebody else's house or her own house. However, it was completely against cultural norms for anybody to go into anybody's home unannounced or uninvited.
There you go.
To begin with.
Yeah.
Okay, there's so many violations of culture here. It's just there's no way that could have been anything that really happened.
Right. Yep.
The other thing, that is the only instance where it says that Yeshua was writing in the dirt or writing in the sand. So there's just a few things there just to give you an idea. The better you understand Torah, the better you understand our culture and how it developed and our language and how it developed, the easier it'll be for you to understand Scripture. But the most important aspect of understanding Scripture, as you've all heard me say, is with the way the Most High reveals it to you at any given moment, with what He wants you to have for that, based on how He's growing you. Now, today we're going to go to the very first one. Now, this is the oldest change, what I'm going to go over with you, that there is. Okay? And it's believed that this change was made by either Ezra's Great Assembly or the resulting adjunct of Palestinian Judaism before Pharisaic Judaism. Okay? Now, if you'll be kind enough to open your scripture to Bereshit chapter 1, verse 1. Let me know when everybody's there.
Okay.
There.
Can everybody read that very first verse?
In the beginning, Elohim created the Haaret, Hashemayim, Haharetz.
Read it one more time.
In the beginning, Elohim created Hashemayim and Haharetz.
Well, read it out of yours, Michael.
In the beginning of Elohim's creating the heavens and the earth.
In the Crown, it actually reads this way. At the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth. The translation in English actually says, at the beginning of God's creating the heaven and the earth. Now in Hebrew, I don't know if you guys have got that Hebrew available to you, but in the Hebrew, there's a little bitty aleph in parentheses in the crown, okay, before, okay, Bereshit. And there's a larger aleph in parentheses before that. The same thing holds true even in Dr. Goebel's Orthodox Jewish Bible. Okay. Now, do you find it interesting at all? You've read it all your life. Even after you got into the area of being Torah observant, you read it all of your life. Now, you're familiar perhaps with the first and the last, the beginning and the end, the Aleph and the Tav. The original Aleph pictograph in ancient Hebrew is a picture of an ox head. And with the Tav, it's a picture of two cross sticks, or as some would make it to be, a cross, which would have been used as a marker. Now, when they're combined, they had the meaning literally from ancient times of an ox toward the mark. Fields were plowed with the plow pulled behind the ox. In order to keep the furrow straight, the driver of the ox would aim toward a mark in the far distance. The meaning of driving the ox toward the mark can be seen in the two letters. Now it gets really interesting. Because that's the extent of what most people have learned. Now, there's a few things I want to share at this point. Is that's not the original rendering of the text. Originally, before you said better sheet, there was an olive there. So, with the olive there by itself, the implication, one of the basic meanings of the olive was what? Besides the ox, the first word of the dictionary using an olive is normally olive bet, meaning Abba. And a lot of times in Hebrew, in Hebrew, when we see the olive, that's normally taken for granted. It's assumed the intent is Abba, almost like a shorthand. Now here that was not the case, almost. Now, the way it actually reads there is, instead of in the beginning or at the beginning, why would they need to change it from in the beginning to at the beginning? The reason this comes up in an interesting way, and you'll never hear this taught publicly too much, particularly in Orthodox communities, are we taught that the Most High himself is omnipresent?
Yeah.
That he's beyond all eternities? Has no beginning and no end? Is that true?
Yes.
If that's true, then how could we have in Scripture in the beginning?
It's more the account of this age or this epoch of the earth.
Well, that is what is commonly
Is
done.
explained as, yeah.
Uh-huh. And so I'm glad you brought it up so quickly. That's what everybody is taught universally, beyond language,
But I don't necessarily agree with it. That's okay.
because it speaks specifically of the heavens and the earth.
But it's like an open.
Now, the original way it was done, the translation would have been this: the Father of all beginnings created Elohim and the heavens and the earth.
Okay.
Now, the reason I'm mentioning, one of the reasons I'm mentioning this, because it is mentioned in several places that the right hand of power that became Yeshua was the first of the Most High's creations.
Right.
Well, if that's true, then that definitely would have been before the foundation of the world. And if that's true, they would have had to have been before the foundation or the world.
Right.
But the foundation of the world, the foundation itself, is never openly explained in Scripture. Now, there's at least 2 or 3 of the prophets that have 2 and 3 word passages that make hints at this, but they were not included in the canon. As I mentioned to you before, we have probably 25, 35 prophets whose writings were not included in the canon because Ezra's Great Assembly developed rules that would require something to be bound together with the others. And so when those prophets were not able to meet those rules, they were not included in the canon. That doesn't mean that they were all of a sudden declared that they weren't prophets, or the Most High didn't speak to them. It's just that because of these rules they came up with, they were not included in the canon. Even the writings, the Psalms, Proverbs, Shlomo's writings, the rest of them were not included in the canon until 200 or 300 years after the destruction of Jerusalem and Masada. The original way it was written was the Father of all beginnings created Elohim and the heavens and the earth. Now, just that rendering alone should just stir up the well springs of the heart and mind. Just saying it as the Father of all beginnings would have eliminated all questions, all doubts about the Most High's eternal existence without beginning and end. And opening up right from the start like that he was the Father of all beginnings, actually created the Elohim, which gives rise to a brand new premise of how we would consider the Elohim, since it was them, let us make man in our image. So that also changes the perceptions of 90% of the first two chapters of Bereshit. However, what it does do is it really reemphasizes the intent of bringing about the kingdom, fruit of the Spirit, and the rest of it. Because saying it like this gives a greater emphasis to that area of scripture here where it says in verse 4, Elohim saw that the light was good, and Elohim separated between the light and the darkness. Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. It was evening and it was morning one day. And again, we've studied one day is luz echad, or ur echad, if you're not part Spanish and part Hebrew. Now, in verse 5, Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Now, if we read verse 1 again, the Father of all beginnings created Elohim and the heavens and the earth. When you read it like that, and then you read the following passage in verse 2, the earth was chaotic and void, and darkness was over the abyss. It changes the perceptions enough with those two areas together, and darkness was over the abyss. A wind from Elohim hovered over the water. So first we have the abyss, and then we have the water. Now you notice in verse 2, at that time, it mentions the earth right after its creation, in sequence at least, maybe not in time with a perception of time. But it also says that the earth was chaotic and void. Now, if we go back to the meaning that most people, the way it's read, by the way most people are taught, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. We have no premise and no way to have anything to understand except from what it says from the prophets, that immediately following that, the earth was chaotic and void, and darkness was over the abyss. So, just by that change, the Father of all beginnings created Elohim and the heavens and the earth. You notice it doesn't say anything in terms of what an English-speaking person would know of the universe or anything beyond the universe or anything having in any language at all having to do with the galaxies, solar system. None of that had come yet because we weren't there yet, even in terms of planets and stars and everything. And so right here, nestled, quietly sitting, is the first time something they chose to change. Don't you think that's just the neatest, tiniest little secret?
Yeah.
How does that feel just reading it that way and hearing it that way? The Father of all beginnings, just from the insertion of the olive there, the Father of all beginnings created Elohim, plural, and the heavens and the earth.
Makes more sense,
Uh-huh.
especially when you have John 17, when Messiah says, I want the Mashiach says, I want the kavod I had with you before.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it goes, well, it doesn't it goes right, it coincides where you could see what he was meaning.
So would you say that that was a segue or a caveat? I'm teasing. It was an intellectual academic statement.
I figured,
Okay.
I was going to say, I was thinking more along the lines of being both.
Well, the implication is obvious. Okay. Segue is normally when you want to change subjects and you want to go on to something else that you've been leading to. A caveat is when you want to add on to what's been said and make it more complete or whole.
Okay. Second would be the second one. I would take it that way.
Both are academic. Okay. Now, I wanted to bring this out to you so that you can see this is where the changes began. Now, as we go along, as you learn more, the reason I started here instead of someplace else was so that you not only would have a place to start, but if you're going to write these things down, and you're going to find out as we go along that they had purpose in when and where and how they did this. Now, while it is true that once the Masoretics, the traditionalists, got a hold of the writings and started using the vowel point system, where they did not have a need to have everything pertain to word order and sequence as much, they began to make changes. The traditionalists made changes in definition. And when most of you know, more than half of our words have more than one definition. Okay. And so one of the most important things about knowing that is that whenever you would study, one of the study rules that we have is that we want to always use the first definition to see if it makes sense. We don't want to peck around. So by eliminating word order, they eliminated the premise for using the first definition to see if you had something called context and syntax. Okay. Now, understanding context and syntax both separately and together becomes of paramount importance when you study when everything is based in word order and sequence. Okay, because the word order and how that word order is read and studied from one word to another is what develops context. How those words are grouped together and how they rely on each other for there to be a context, that interweaving of one word to another for meaning is called syntax. Syntax. Okay. They don't work well standing alone. You can talk about them when you're making reference to them one at a time. Okay. But in most languages, if you don't understand the meanings of the words, you will start losing at least the context of sentence structure. Okay. In English, you can start off with the dog. You can say the dog ran because English, the subject is king and the verb is always supporting the subject in one way or the other. And it's called a predicate. Okay, then you have synonyms, you have prepositions, you have other areas of modifiers to all support the subject verb relationship in an English structure in the English language. I'm sure most people, when they got out of school, they immediately put that back in the cemetery in the back of their mind and forgot about it. Okay, but it's very basic academic work. Now, in Hebrew, the verb is king, and it's the noun that actually supports the verb, the subject. Okay. Now keep that in mind. Now, in order for that to be the father of all beginnings, there, keeping in mind how Hebrew is an activity language, everything is active, which makes the verb, the predicate, king. Okay. You couldn't say created is the big meaning of the verb there. So what actually carries the activity of the passage when it says the father of all beginnings? If we don't have an understanding that everything about the Most High, the Father himself, is activity, if we don't have an understanding that everything with the Hebrew language is activity, then we won't really understand how this process works. If we say the king is on the throne, where is the activity? We know that in Hebrew, when we say king, we're not talking about a man with a crown just sitting on a throne. When it says the king is on the throne, we're talking about the king is actually kinging because he's sitting on the throne. It's a place of activity, the place of ruling, the place of dominance, the place of authority. Okay, so it's a place of activity. So if we see the king is on the throne, we automatically know in Ivrit that the king to be on the throne has to be kinging, activity, doing. Does this make any sense?
Yeah.
So if you understand that, then whenever you would say the father of all beginnings,
Right.
we would get the same implication.
That's the beginnings.
The father of all beginnings created Elohim and the heavens and the earth. Is this coming together a little bit? Now, that would make the right hand of power to be what? One of the Elohim.
Right.
And since we know that the Father, the Most High Himself, is a spirit and has a spirit, then we would be seeking and understanding for the other Elohim. So obviously there's things that the Most High has yet to reveal, even in the simpleness here. Everybody with me? Now, if you consider the amount of times that this was done, they estimate between 80 to 100 times just in Torah alone. And then another 250, 300 times in the rest of the Tanakh. So do you think this is worthwhile in studying?
Mhm. Yes.
Now, this has to be a part of the Aleph and Tav. As I shared with you, the ox moving in the direction of the mark. That means from right there at the beginning, if you speak of the ox staying on track, staying on the path to get to the mark. And one of the idiomatic expressions of sin is missing the mark. If you're missing the mark, then obviously the Father was not guiding it. Which maybe gives us a more relevant and better understanding of sin being disobedience or trespass against his teachings. Now, when Moshe first received the 10 words from the fiery finger of the Most High, and then off of each word of those 10 words, he elaborated so that a portion of Torah was attached to each one of those 10 words. It's amazing that from those 10 words and the elaboration from each one, they've only come up with 4 or 5 areas of Torah: the commandments, judgments, the statutes, and I'll leave you to your own study to figure out the other 2, unless you can add them now. Now, this is right at the beginning, very first word, the very first verse, the very first chapter. Of course, when this was done, there were no chapter and verse delineations. The reason that the Masoretics enjoyed the chapter and verse so much, it gave them an added facet to use in order to make more changes. Because if you notice in the scrolls, the chapter and verse doesn't exist. Or has anybody studied from scrolls yet? Okay, that's another thing we'll have to do. Shabbat shalom, Hannah. Oh,
Shalom.
okay. Oh, did you enjoy your time on the beach today?
If only.
Oh, it's all around you there. You must be up on a little knoll overlooking
That worked too.
it. Shabbat shalom, Hananiah.
Shabbat shalom.
You know, up until the Inquisition began by the Catholic Church in agreement with the monarchy of Spain, we didn't have any last names. And so modern day people coming into tour observance and their studies realizing that we always seek to be a little more correct. And so the genealogies, culturally, we always go from back, reverse engineering back from son to father, etc. So in the moniker that Hananiah has picked up, Hananiah ben David, that would have been one of the ways if you did not know your genealogy, if you didn't have a genealogy put together by anybody, even yourself. Well, then that lack of genealogy would force you to go to those that highlighted that tribe. And of course, David Melech would have been one of those highlights of the tribe of Yehuda. So, in going from one person's genealogy to another, most genealogies will go at least 5 generations, if not more. A few generations go a whole lot more, but they all go at least back a ways. Now, I have a question, and I want to see if anybody can answer me. Okay. By what reason and means does the New Testament mention genealogies as being vain genealogies?
And the arguing,
Would you elaborate, please?
like saying I'm from this tribe, so I have more say than, you know, I'm better because I'm of this tribe, or I know more because I'm of this tribe.
Well, okay. You ever thought about looking that word up to see what that word vain would actually mean in Hebrew?
I know in reference to the third command, it means no use, non-use, or misuse of the name.
The word vain is all it was mentioning.
Oh,
Now, where you mention in terms of Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh, don't take his name in vain. It means to, by making his name common, you cause the Most High to keep his Kodesh with the name hidden instead of being revealed. So people associate his name with different things in a regular society or regular culture without it having any emphasis on its Kodesh, its set apartness, its holiness. Well, then you've made it common. If that's the case there, why would they call a genealogy common? And why would they advise in the New Testament the way that they advise against it? And then turn around and list Yeshua's genealogy. Does that appear to be a conflict there? Is that a catch-22? What would that do to me with my genealogy and others of the Kohanim? When we were all in Babylon within the first exile, and Ezra, the Cohen, and Nabi was given the edict by the Most High, and it was proven out with the dreams that he gave the ruler to go back to our lands, rebuild the temple, and then Jerusalem. The Kohanim were told they needed to present their genealogies. And those that were Kohanim that could not prove their genealogy or didn't have it, access to it anymore, they were brought along as well, but they could not handle the Kodesh areas. So, how would you know when a genealogy is common or vain? In Bereshit, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, in the crown, it changes it from genealogy to chronology. And even in the OJB from Dr. Goebel, he gets it right in verse 4. These are the generations, the Toldot of the heavens and the earth when they were created. So even here in the original, we still acknowledge that even creation had a genealogy, had generations. So why was it built up in Christianity for everybody to have such a negative understanding of genealogies? And yet they're okay with Yeshua's genealogy. No answers? During our exile in Babylon, the word rabbi was used as a form of respect for teachers, scholars, etc. And every time one would pass, even the ruler, he goes, "There's a rabbi." The word rabbi was a word that was given to us from that time of scholars, teachers, academics, educators. However, it soon took on an additional definition of great ones, even righteous ones. So which one of all those definitions was the letter in the New Testament saying when it said, don't call any man rabbi? Which one of those definitions was being used? Or does anybody have an idea without studying the passage and trying to understand the context and syntax? Instead of saying, don't call any man a rabbi, are they saying, don't call any man great? Don't call any man righteous? Don't call any man a teacher? Don't call any man an academic?
Don't call any man great.
Why would that be true?
That's what I understand comes from the context of the teaching that's there of exalting people to the status of Elohim.
Elohim there would have been judge. However, before they changed the definitions around a lot, okay, people considered scholars of Torah and the academic study of Torah to be a path to righteousness. And I shared with you from last week's parashat where it said, particularly referring to the house of Yaakov, that obedience of Torah observance in and of itself was righteousness. Do you remember reading that? So, if a man was very prudent and it meant a lot to him to be Torah observant, it would have been a common cultural thing to call that man, because of his Torah observance and because he was so what's the word in English for it? Attention to detail. Okay, to where they could ascribe that to him, whereas Torah observance, because of what Torah had said, that he was a righteous man, or that he could be great in his righteousness. That's culturally where that came from. So to call no man great, or especially not to say that it's a righteous man, why would we be told that? Who makes a man righteous? He's the only one that can do that. We cannot ascribe righteousness to ourselves or anybody else legitimately. That's where that actually came from. Now, if there's any righteousness to be seen with a man, it would be because he's in the house of Israel or he's in the kingdom, and that righteousness that you're able to perceive would have been the righteousness the Father has given him or put on him after judging him, and he was justified. That justification of the Most High is, in fact, his righteousness. So if you're able to see that man's righteousness, how would you address that? With the evidence that the Most High is revealing to you of his justification, his righteousness, would you be able to call him a righteous man then? Rabbinically, the way they refer to it now, they call him a tzaddik. Or a tzaddikim. So do you see where having a lack of understanding of our language and even its development can leave you a little bit without any understanding? For on one hand, we know the Most High is the only one that can justify us and put his justification on us to where we actually have clothing and righteousness as it's expressed in the writings. Okay. On the other hand, to observe somebody being Torah observant and them articulating that with their attention to detail and their attention to be given to the Most High. But is that to say that you could not express your observation that there goes a righteous man or woman?
Hmm.
So as long as you don't use the verbiage that's to call somebody a rabbi, you're safe. Would it be considered a sin to observe that somebody is righteous in their Torah observance? Torah does not teach that you sin in calling somebody Torah observant, or that in their Torah observance are doing all that they can before the Most High in that observance. Do you recall perhaps last week's parashah? My mother used to tell me in 3 languages that if my head was not attached, we would have trouble finding it. So it gets really interesting. In Devarim chapter 6, and it starts in verse 24. And then Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh commanded us to fulfill all of these statutes, to fear Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh, our Elohim, to benefit us all the time, to sustain us as on this day. And in verse 25, and it shall be counted as our righteousness when we take care to fulfill all this commandment before Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh, our Elohim, as he commanded us. It shall be counted as our righteousness. But it doesn't say we count it as righteousness. It says the only way it can be counted, as it says, would be if the Most High is doing it through his judgment. So if we are calling somebody righteous, are we taking the place of him in his judgment? That's the danger. And so, as they hedge around that possibility, what did they say in their letter? Be careful, don't call any man rabbi, don't call any man great or righteous, because you are not the judge. And then what's the difference between you should not judge because you are not Elohim, and yet Yeshua said, doesn't it say in the Psalms that we are all Elohim or we are all judges? So we're not working with word order, and we're only working with the ballpoint system and the traditionalist text. Can this get to be confusing? So in order to avoid this, they started using a system to change the order of definitions and how words would be used. And for the longest time, only the scribes knew the original definitions and knew the definitions from ancient Hebrew. Is this starting to make a little bit more sense? So is this helping you to understand how our study might help us to understand things a little bit more? This does not discount the great need in prayer and praise for us to be as intimate as we can with him and to cleave to him, as we've discussed. That surrender must go on day by day, 24/7, as well as the Most High will reveal it to us in all ways. Because even in our effort to cleave to him, to be more intimate to him, to surrender to him day by day, even that has to be revealed to us by him. Even in everything that he reveals to us, there is an accompanying Kodesh with it. That's why we feel as we do every time something is revealed to us. Now, I wanted to cover some of these areas in general with you to begin with, to give you a better idea from your heart, your mind together as one. So you to see, we don't need to be Orthodox. We don't need to be any of the American inventions of Reform, Progressive, because all of the American inventions, just like the Orthodox today, is still politically motivated, whether it's a secular political motivation or it's a religious political motivation. Okay. In the modern rabbinical world of Judaism, there are several cultural things that are heard often. One of the most common is, of all the rabbis around, all the scholars around, if you really want to know what Torah teaches, ask an Orthodox rabbi, because they're the best studied in Torah and Talmud and other areas of our law, the ethics of the fathers, etc. Okay. Now, the Orthodoxy, if they have trouble understanding something, they in turn will tell people what? If you want a better understanding than we can give you, who do they tell you to go see?
Kohanim.
Yes. And within all the lines of the Kohanim, who would the different lines of the Kohanim tell you to go see? The line of Sadok. And what do we tell people? Who's got to be first? Always and ever. These are the way, even in Judaism today, everybody stays linked. We have our difficulties, we have our differences, and we have the way that a lot of us are ostracized. However, in the end, they've got to break down into those channels of communication again to seek what they desire, to get what they want and leave again. Now, how does everybody feel so far about what we've covered?
Feel good.
Good.
Everybody else okay as well?
Good.
She always says that. Now, as we learn about some of these changes, this should reinforce what we already have. Now, you know you have the structure for understanding the circumcision of the heart. Now that you have this name for it, how much did it make you go through everything you'd already learned and start putting it in place in your life? how much did the Most High start stirring your heart and say, okay, I learned about fruit of the Spirit. Yeah, here's the fruit of the Spirit. It's the Most High's activity working through me as a worthy vessel. And you read about vessels, honorable vessels, vessels that were not made for that, and how vessels that are not made for that can be changed as well because of intercessory prayer. So you start going over all the things that you've been learning and how much we have to say before the Most High. And let me interject this for a moment, please. It just came to mind. I spoke with a man probably 3 weeks ago, older man. Now, please understand, for me to say it's an older man, that should get your attention. He told me that all of his life, the Most High had never answered any of his prayers.
Wow.
Oh,
And when he related to me some of the things in his life, genuinely, it was tragic. If somebody had been writing a movie script or a TV script, I don't think they could have done justice to this man.
Wow.
Yet and still, he was still around to tell his tale. And I really believe that everything culminated right then. Because at first, I almost made a mistake. I almost started interceding for him by myself. He had squeezed into 50 or 60 or 80 years. So much sadness, so many tragic events. I felt like he had maybe relived the Inquisition and the Holocaust and American slavery all wrapped up in one.
That was a lot.
And then some.
We had a rough life.
And so I felt inadequate. And I asked the Most High to help me. Because I did not feel comfortable in interceding for him by myself. And so I asked him to give me about 10 million people, for those that have already lived, those that are living, and those will live, to intercede for this man and his family line. They really needed it.
Mm.
And I asked the man, I said, do you have any money? Do you have anything of value? And he says, the only thing that I have of value. And he looked at me really funny. He took out a little bitty container that had 2 50-cent pieces in it that had been given to him by his dad. That's all he had left of anything. Those 50-cent pieces have been passed down to his dad from his grandpa. So they were older coins. And I said, how come you never traded them in for money? He said, because then I would spend the money and I wouldn't have anything. And so he says, but since you're asking, and I feel it's necessary, I'm going to give these to you. Now, a few weeks ago, when I experienced that, I really had a moment with the Most High. I really became more afraid and fearful of the Most High. On one hand, I had to be obedient to the commandment.
Thank
On
you.
the other, how could I take this from him? So I decided to do something that I hadn't done before. So I did what the Most High told me to do. He received atonement, and the blessing from the Most High. I immediately gave the 2 coins back to him and told him he was right in not spending it and in not turning him in for money. And then I usually carry, over the years, a $5 bill. There's a funny story that goes along with that. But this time, I not only had a $5 bill, I had a $10 bill, I had a $20 bill, and I had 3 $1 bills. So I gave them to him. Each dollar bill I had. It was not to compete with him, because nothing that I had could compete with his willingness to give from the heart. I was afraid to even be seen as possibly trying to compete with such a giving heart. It really made me afraid before the Most High. So when I did that, the man says, "Why are you giving me so much?" And I told him, this is but a little thing compared to what the Most High is going to give you. And he said, "What's he giving me?" I said, "He's going to answer all of your prayers from all of your life, and all of the prayers from all the lives of all your family line. They're going to live through you those answers. And he's revealing himself to you, which means he's chosen you. And you have a future that you never felt that you could have. And it's all yours now. And so this little change that I'm giving to you," I says, "I'm not a man of wealth at all, but I've given you what the Most High would give to you, and I've given you all that I have in my pocket to give." And so I kept that experience in my heart. And you guys are the first ones I shared it with. It was a small thing. Nobody else was there. He probably hadn't had a bath in a week. And there was no wind blowing. And so the aroma was just kind of sitting right there. But when the Most High brought his Kodesh there, it seemed to leave. And so he had him. As him and I were talking afterward, all of a sudden he looked up at me and he says, "You're different than everybody else that I've met." And I said, "Well, only the Most High can reveal that to you." And he says, "Who are you?" I said, "A servant to the Most High." And he goes, "No, who are you?" I said, "A servant to the Most High." I said, "Couldn't be anything better than that." And he says, "I haven't felt this good since I was a child."
Mhm.
He says, "Will you tell me how to know him?"
Wow.
So I did. And he did.
Mhm.
He didn't have anything. And maybe that's where some people need to be inside of themselves to be able to look up to him. Don't worry, there's no altar call. But I wanted to share with you just how the Most High can use you if you're letting him work his fruit of the Spirit through you. You never know what experience you're going to have. You may never talk like that to a homeless person on the street. You may never talk to the Bill Gates of the world, okay, or the Musks of the world. However, if you talk to every person in the moment the Most High gives you, with the Most High speaking through you at that time, and the Most High works his fruit of the Spirit to you, do you realize the conversations you're going to have with the Most High in New Jerusalem about that? Now, for the Most High, with him and the right hand of power, the light or the lights of the city. Now think about this. We're in New Jerusalem. Think about it. We're in New Jerusalem. The Most High himself, the Father of all beginnings, and Elohim, they're there. They are the light of the city. And everybody else that he has ruled that will be there because of our intercessions, because of his choices, everybody is there. There's no more heaven because it fled away and he's made a new one. And so this has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with profits and loss. It has nothing to do with rich and poor. It has nothing to do with all that had existed before. You don't have a reference point anymore. None of the reference points that we have now, they're all gone. We're there, we're New Jerusalem, and we're before him. And he lets you know he has not forgotten the smallest act that you did with, or the smallest act that he did through you. He hasn't forgotten every moment of growth. He hasn't forgotten every inch that you took as you came back to him, as he drew you back. As we seek to cleave with him, as we seek greater intimacy with him. And as you've read here from what Hannah brought out to us in Chronicles, you can see that he is everything. And everything that we have is from him and because of him. Our hearts, our love, belonging to him, him choosing us, all of it. Can you imagine being with him, New Jerusalem, and him saying, I haven't forgotten any moment. I remember when you were in a physical body and you shed these tears. I remember whenever you did this, you could have done more, but you did this. I remember, and you're here with me now. And you're here. Look at all of these intercessory prayers. I've counted every one. I've counted every tear that was shed in intercession for you. I've counted every thought that was in intercession for you. And here are the ones that interceded for you. Can you imagine, just for a moment, being in that light of the city, being with that river that flows from the right hand of power? Can you imagine experiencing that without worrying about the end of the day, without worrying about getting tired, without worrying about taking a break for lunch, without worrying about having to go to the bathroom, without worrying about any of what you are concerned with now? As he reveals to you all the people that interceded for you, that got you there, all the fruit of the Spirit that remained, that honored him, every way that he worked through you, every way he used you for a vessel, all of it. And you see then, because we won't have physical bodies, it'll still be us as a spirit being of light, and that consciousness, the nefesh. Can you imagine at all, without having to worry about time or the mechanism of time? What did we do yesterday? What are we going to do tomorrow? What's the schedule? We're all there with him, before him, with whatever new parts of his teaching, instruction, direction is to the world that'll be there. Can you imagine being in that environment? Because your heart was fully circumcised, he's clothed you fully with righteousness. You took that open door from Yeshua into the kingdom. Your name was found written in the book of life. You skipped right over that lake of fire. New Jerusalem. Does your imagination take you there? Do your eyes take you there with all that you can consider with him? This is the substance of my daydreams. This is what I think about as I'm going to sleep, thanking him that I'll be there. We have to be active in our direction with him, active with all of it. You've got the basic structure of the fruit of the Spirit, Most High working through us. You know what circumcision of the heart. Now, it wasn't milk, but now we got to start working on it. You got to understand the fruits of the Spirit. We got to understand more of his word. We've got to understand that voice that we identify as the voice walking in the cool of the morning. We have to start identifying everything about it with us, with him, because we're cleaving to him, we're seeking him, we're greater intimacies with him. Every day is better. Then we are redeveloping ourselves through his Kodesh. We're redeveloping ourselves as we're redeemed. We're redeveloping ourselves as he gives us a greater awareness, as he reveals more of himself, working through us as a worthy vessel. So it becomes more and more, it becomes to a point to where the flesh and blood body cannot endure it anymore because of his Kodesh being so much. To the point we don't need it anymore. And we get even closer to him and more intimate with him. We cleave to him even more. Everyone we face, when you look at strangers, when you look at people who like you, when you look at people that hate you, when you look at people who want you dead, when you look at strangers, when you look at people in need, when you look at people that are anybody, does it occur to you for a moment that the Most High is looking through those eyes as well as seeing them himself separate from you? That he's looking through our eyes. He's using us for a vessel. He's working his fruit of the Spirit through us. He's using our eyes too. So one of the things, in addition to what we've been asking for, start asking him more often. Let me see me through your eyes. I want to see me as you see me. Because sometimes I don't see me too good. Let me see me through your eyes. And then when I can see me through your eyes, and you trust me with it, let me see some of these others that you're working your fruit of the Spirit through me. Would you let me see them through your eyes? The more we're a part of him, the more we seek him, the more we cleave to him, the more we want to be a part of him, the more we want to be a part of his works, the more we want to be a part of the activity of his fruit of the Spirit. We grow. Can you imagine anything better than being able to see yourself through his eyes, to know there's no doubt in how he loves you? There's no doubt in how he sees his perfect creation within of that spirit being of light, the consciousness, that nefesh within us. Would not that be a wonderful journey? Would not that be a wonderful thing for him to open our eyes to see ourselves as he sees us and to see others as he sees them? If that becomes a part of your everyday life, to see that way and to give yourself to that fruit of the Spirit going through you, first you're going to ask yourself naturally, because it's an individual thing, how's that going to be? How's that going to feel? If he's doing everything through me, then what should I do anything? Because he still needs it to be the way he said it to be. His order, his Seder. And then to be able to see through his eyes in the way that he sees others, and you can see why he gives them that fruit of the Spirit. You begin to see through his eyes to see how they're desiring him and their heart is hurting, and your intercessions and other people's intercessions is what produces those moments. Does this make any sense? Am I saying too much?
No,
Mhm.
It has to be his love loving through you to whomever he chooses to receive it. It's got to be his kindness. It can't be shallow and say, thank you for your kindness. You've been kind to me today. You have no idea how much I appreciate that. Every time I visit among the little people. His fruit of the Spirit does not condescend. His fruit of the Spirit does not insult. His fruit of the Spirit they don't take away the value of a person on any given day. Well, I gotta take a break for a few minutes. While the Most High gives me whatever else he wants me to have for you guys today. So tell me what you think.
it resonates, that's for sure.
Say,
It resonates.
Yep.